Welcome to this introduction to semantics, part of the course Semantics and Pragmatics. Semantics and pragmatics are part of linguistics, which is, or aspires to be, the scientific study of language. Linguistics, as we understand it today, includes a theoretical enterprise, which studies linguistic structures in phonology, syntax, and so on, and special disciplines such as psycholinguistics, which study processes of various kinds and at different timescales. For example, how human language evolved, how languages change historically and vary geographically, how language develops, how it is acquired or learned, and how brains and computers process language. Semantics and pragmatics are sciences of meaning. As part of theoretical linguistics, they too study particular kinds of structures. Now, all sciences must establish their objects of study. Objects like planets, molecules, genes, volcanoes, markets, and so on. Sometimes these objects just need to be identified through direct or indirect observation. For example, a planet in the night sky or a volcano on some island. Other times these objects have to be constructed. Genes and markets are examples of objects that need active conceptualization and even theory to be carved out of messy biological or economic data and to exist as objects of scientific research. The object of semantics is our knowledge of meaning. This knowledge is in our heads. It consists of tacit mental states that can be identified and studied using the methods of phenomenological and experimental psychology. That is, we use various types of data to clarify what speakers know about meaning in their language and how they use this knowledge to make sense of language in context in real time. This approach has been prominent at least since the so-called mentalistic turn in linguistics starting in the 1950s. Semantics then studies our knowledge of particular structures, for example, semantic relations. Such relations can apply between words or larger linguistic units, like sentences, as in these examples. An important semantic relation is synonymy, or sameness of meaning, as between sentences 1 and 2 here. Another is contradiction, or logical opposition of meaning, as between 3 and 4. And a very important one is entailment, or logical consequence. Here, 5, John murdered the bank manager, entails 6, the bank manager is dead, because we cannot imagine a situation in which John murdered the bank manager, but the bank manager is not dead. Note, however, that 6 does not entail 5. The bank manager could be dead without John having murdered him. Perhaps the bank manager just died of old age. We will study other types of relations between words or between sentences in this course. In the rest of this lecture, we will explore two concepts that are quite important in organizing our knowledge of meaning, namely sense and reference. Gottlob Frege was the first in the modern period who clarified this distinction in an 1892 paper titled On Sense and Reference. Consider the expressions evening star or Hesperus and morning star or Phosphorus. It was thought by the ancients that these were different objects, hence the different names. One star visible in the morning sky, Phosphorus, and another star visible in the evening sky, Hesperus. It turns out that these 4 different expressions actually refer to the same entity, that is, not a star at all, but the planet Venus. Frege says that these expressions are in a way equivalent because they refer to the same object, but in another way they are not equivalent because they have different senses, different modes of presentation of the same entity. So Frege distinguishes 2 aspects of meaning, sense and reference, and we need this distinction to separate 2 kinds of identity statements. Sentences like 7, Hesperus is Hesperus, of the form A equals A, and statements like 8, Hesperus is Phosphorus, of the form A equals B. If you want, you can pause the video now and think about whether the words in 7 and 8 have the same or different senses, the same or different reference. The answer is that Hesperus in 7 is used with the same sense to refer to the same entity, Venus, while in 8, Hesperus and Phosphorus refer again to the same entity, Venus, but their senses are different. This is what, according to Frege, accounts for the fact that when we use 7, we aren't saying much at all, whereas when we use 8, we do convey information. Someone who does not know that Hesperus is Phosphorus, one who doesn't know that we are giving different names to the same thing, would be genuinely informed by 8. They would learn something new. This is what Frege calls cognitive value. We need the distinction between sense and reference to explain why certain sentences have cognitive value while others do not. Frege is often touted as a champion of anti-mentalism or anti-psychologism, but in fact, also in his work, we find a tension that is at the heart of semantics, namely the need to explain how language is interfaced with human cognition through the notion of sense or something equivalent, and with the world through the notion of reference or denotation. This corresponds to two traditions or two ways of doing semantics. One, known as referential or denotational semantics, where meaning is what expressions in the language denote or what speakers refer to in the world. And another, called representational semantics, in which meaning is the mental content we construct internally when we use language. Formal semantics is another way to refer to the former tradition, and cognitive semantics to the latter. Through the course, we will see examples of these approaches and how they are complementary. But let's now look at a few basic ideas in referential semantics. One is the distinction between referring and non-referring expressions, which applies to expressions as such, as well as to occurrences or uses or tokens of the same expressions. For example, consider the noun phrase a heart transplant in 9. They performed a heart transplant this morning, and in 10, a heart transplant is a very serious procedure. In which sentence is a heart transplant referring to a particular event, and when is it non-referring? Pause the video now to think about this question. The answer is that in 9, the speaker is referring to a particular heart transplant that happened this morning, so we have a referring use of the expression, whereas in 10, the speaker is talking about any or all heart transplants, but is not referring to any one in particular. Some uses of expressions are ambiguous, like an apartment in 11. Imagine a situation in which someone would utter 11 with a referring use of an apartment, and then imagine a situation in which 11 is uttered with a non-referring use of the same expression, an apartment. Another distinction is that between constant and variable reference. There are expressions that refer almost always to the same entity across contexts and utterances, like proper names and place names. Certain theories call these rigid designators. Eiffel Tower refers to the same entity whenever we use the expression. In contrast, there are expressions whose reference changes across contexts or across speakers, like indexicals and deictic expressions, for example, I, this, my office, and so on. For these expressions, acts of referring rely on context. We need to know when, where, and by whom the expression is used to figure out what it refers to. But it turns out that context is important for all expressions, sometimes even for proper names. A famous example is Madagascar, which used to name part of the African mainland, but now is the name of Africa's largest island. Here, what makes a difference is the historical or cultural context in which Madagascar is used. A third important distinction is that between reference and extensions, which seem to be conflated in Frege's definition of reference. A referent is the entity that is picked out by an expression in a given context. Here, we are thinking of the expression as a token. An extension, instead, is the set of entities that could be referents of the expression. Here, we are thinking of the expression as a type. If I say, I have just dropped a piece of chalk, what is the referent and what is the extension of the noun phrase piece of chalk? Pause the video and try to answer. Piece of chalk refers to the particular piece of chalk that I have just dropped, while its extension would be the set of pieces of chalk that could become referents in particular contexts of utterance. We have introduced one high-level distinction between sense and reference after Frege, and three more specific distinctions between referring and non-referring expressions or uses of expressions, between constant and variable reference, and between reference and extensions. We can now analyze a few concrete phenomena in the domain of nominal reference. Take proper names. These are typical referring expressions. Two theories have been discussed traditionally to account for how proper names refer. The definite descriptions theory, which is due to Bertrand Russell, which says that proper names refer in virtue of an associated definite description. For example, Einstein refers to the person that is picked out by the description, the father of general relativity. This is called the definite description because it is introduced by the definite article the. The now dominant theory that is due to Saul Kripke is a causal historical theory. It says that a name is linked to a specific individual via a baptism, an original use of the name, and a subsequent causal chain of uses. So according to this theory, Einstein would refer to the individual Albert Einstein even if the definite description was shown to be false. For example, if a historian proved that Einstein in fact plagiarized the theory of relativity. Now, these are both theories of semantic reference, of what a name refers to, and not of speaker's reference, of what a speaker can use a name to refer to. For example, when I say, Einstein just opened the drawer, to refer to my cat, to mean that she is very smart. Moving to noun phrases, we find that their reference depends on syntactic form, whether it is definite or indefinite. Consider 13 and 14. I spoke to a woman or the woman about the noise. And pause the video to reflect on how their meaning differs and why. Here's one answer. A woman in 13 introduces a new referent in discourse, a woman we did not talk about before, but the woman in 14 refers to a referent that has already been introduced in discourse and that both speaker and hearer are aware of. Importantly, reference is not always guaranteed to succeed. Sometimes nominals and other expressions in language simply fail to refer. For example, if I say, the King of France is bald, I'm not referring to anyone currently existing, since France does not have a king. And another important observation is that nominals can refer to abstract or fictive entities. So we can imagine a novel where the King of France successfully refers to the current King of France in the fictional world and in the present time of the novel, not in the real world. Moreover, noun phrases can refer to sets or to individuals in those sets. Take distributive versus collective reference. What is the difference between 16 and 17? In the people in the lift avoided each other's eyes, the people in the lift refers to people as individuals, and that's distributive reference, because only individuals can avoid each other's eyes. Instead, in the people in the lift proved too heavy for the lift, the people in the lift refers to a group, that's collective reference, because only a group can weigh too much to be lifted. Or take intersective versus collective predication. 18, the animals were gray and big, means that the same animals were gray and big. So we are referring to the intersection of gray animals and big animals. While 19, the animals were small and big, means that there were small animals and big animals. We are referring to those two sets collectively. To these complexities, again, we need to add various contextual factors that can determine what noun phrases refer to. Now, nominals are the linguist's favorite cases of referential expressions, largely because for proper names, nouns, and noun phrases, reference appears to connect language to identifiable things in the world, if not directly, then at least via the mind. But there are other types of words, and we need theories that account for how those refer to. For expressions like verbs, adjectives, prepositions, it will be more difficult to say what these words refer to, let alone to equate meaning with reference. We will see that we need more complex semantic structures to describe meaning for those expressions, and these structures will inevitably be conceptual or cognitive. Already for Frege, predicates refer not to extensions but to concepts, and in modern theories, concepts are understood in terms of cognitive psychology. Again, we see that meaning swings between mind and world. Another hard case for referential semantics is sentences. What do they refer to, if anything? We must distinguish between sentences and propositions. A proposition is the thought that the sentence expresses. So the same thought can be expressed by different sentences, as examples 20 to 23 show. Armed with this distinction, Frege argued that every sentence has a meaning and a reference, which is a truth value, true or false. For Frege, a sentence expresses a proposition or thought, and that's the meaning of the sentence. But all true sentences share the same reference, the truth value true, and all false sentences share the same reference, the truth value false. A slightly more intuitive theory would be that sentences express propositions, but refer to states of affairs or facts in the world, while true and false are predicates that we apply to sentences. We will see that this is a good way to think about truth, and we will use it to define important notions in semantics, primarily that of entailment. All of these proposals are designed to account for the fact that different sentences may use different words with different senses, but can still refer to the same state of affairs. For example, consider 24, the evening star is very bright tonight, and 25, Venus is very bright tonight. Let's think about whether and how they might differ in terms of sense and reference. We already know that evening star and Venus refer to the same entity, so the truth values of 24 and 25 are the same. Whenever one is true, the other is also true. Whenever one is false, the other is false. But they use different expressions, which have different senses, so the senses of these two sentences must also differ. If we follow Frege, they express different thoughts or propositions. Frege's theory of meaning, as applied to sentences, makes 24 and 25 non-synonymous. Frege's theory is the starting point of modern semantics, but we will see in the rest of the course that it needs to be amended, corrected in several ways to actually work as a theory of meaning for natural language. Another key distinction tracing back to Frege is that between compositionality and context. These are two principles that are supposed to explain how the meaning of a sentence and the meaning of its parts are related. Context says, never ask for the meaning of a word in isolation, but only in the context of a proposition. So words get their meaning in the context of the sentences that they appear in. Compositionality says, the meaning of a whole is a function of the meanings of the parts and of the way they are syntactically combined. So sentences get their meaning from the words they are composed of and syntax. Apart from the question of what is meaning in these definitions, sense or reference or something else, we can ask whether they are in tension or perhaps even in contradiction with one another. And that is a question that I leave to you for now. But let me conclude with some thoughts on the goal of semantics. Why do we need theories of meaning? A complete answer must consider communication. We need theories of meaning to explain at least these two facts. First, that we manage to communicate more than we say. If I tell you that I ate some of the cookies, I'm communicating that I ate some, but not all of the cookies. And yet, I'm not saying that I didn't eat all of them. That meaning just gets across without me having to say it explicitly. Or if I tell you the King of Belgium is bald, I'm communicating that Belgium has a king, even though I never said that. I just said that he is bald. So we often mean more than we say, and this more is not random, but bears a systematic relationship to what we do say. Second, we actually manage to communicate what we mean, although we often say less than what we mean. In other words, there are boundaries to miscommunication. Perhaps when I say I ate some of the cookies, you will understand that I ate most of them, but not all, whereas I mean that I ate a few, not all, and not even most. But from what I say, I ate some of the cookies, it is very unlikely that you will misunderstand me as saying that I ate all of them, because if that was what I meant to say, I would have just said so. And it is even less likely that you will misunderstand me as saying, for example, that I ate some of the apples. The point here is that interpretation of both what is said and what is not said, but gets communicated anyway, is constrained by the meaning of words, by grammar, and by principles of language use, what we call pragmatics. In this course, our goal will be to explain these two facts and many others that exemplify them. For now, thank you for watching.